Today we are launching our ADB Sustainable Development Working Paper titled Digital Connectivity and Low Earth Orbit Satellite Constellations. And we have a number of excellent speakers, including two panelists who will be commenting on the paper, guests from the International Telecommunications Union and Keio University in Japan. I'm very excited about this webinar, and I'll just go ahead and give you a couple of pieces of advice for enjoying this fully. One is that we have a Q&A function that you can use to put in comments and questions throughout. And we would hope that you can also look at what other people are commenting or asking and upvote those parts that you like, so that later when we get to our short Q&A, I can take those questions and pose them to the panelists and speakers. The event materials will be made available. That includes presentations at the event page, which you can find where you also registered. And if you have any follow-up questions or would like to get in touch with us, you can do so via the email here, dtcommunity@adb.org. Let's get started. The program today is a quick introduction by myself. I'm Arndt Hussar, and I work for the Digital Technology Unit in the Asian Development Bank. And I will be followed by the lead author of this paper, which is John Garrity, who is a consultant with us on digital connectivity. After that, we will have comments from the Chief of Unit, the Chief of the Digital Technology Unit here at ADB, Thomas Abel. And then we will hear two perspectives. One from the Regional Director of the ITU Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, Atsuko Okuda, followed by Professor Jun Murai, who is the Distinguished Professor of Keio University in Japan, and also the founder of the WIDE project. And then I really hope we have some time to get to questions from you, the audience, which we will take through the Q&A function of Zoom. Now, why does ADB want to focus on this topic of internet connectivity? Well, we do know that it's essential for economic growth and social development, but it's also critical to resilience and recovery, as we saw during COVID and the COVID recovery. The digital divide directly impacts economic opportunities, and it does raise income inequalities. And we do also see that telecom infrastructure has been mostly privately funded, but there is a real role for public policy and public finance that is crucial for further expansion of networks. The low-hanging fruit really have been picked. So here comes the hard part of extending network connectivity, closing the remaining gaps. And that requires policies, business models, technologies, and partnerships. A few figures that contextualize this. In Asia Pacific, among the 2.2 billion non-internet subscribers, people that are not using the internet, and that's the blue bar on the right, the majority is covered by 3G networks. But still, the remaining 2 billion people have either affordability issues or they don't find the content relevant to them that they can find on the internet. It could be because of language. And Asia as a region has made significant gains with affordability, but it still struggles to provide equal access. Gender, age, literacy, remoteness, rural regions, and unemployment, all these are factors in getting access to the internet. And there's relevance that I mentioned before. Even when the affordability targets are reached, the lower income populations, which are depicted here on the right with these red bars, still find prices of internet inaccessible, unaffordable. You see here the green line, that the barrier that goes across the diagram, that's the 2% target that's been set globally. And you can tell that in all the countries that ADB covers, I've marked here the regions that we serve, the red bars are way ahead of that 2% target. In total, 55%, and that's 2.37 billion people in Asia and the Pacific, are not using the internet. Let's get to access. 3 billion people reside greater than 10 kilometers away from high-capacity, high-speed fiber optic infrastructure. Out of those, 1.5 billion reside more than 50 kilometers away from these networks. And when it comes to mobile connectivity, there's still 200 million people in Asia and the Pacific that are not covered by 3G networks, which basically is the minimum that can provide you mobile internet. Now, this topic of low Earth orbit satellite constellations, the high speed and low latency broadband that is being promised, how do we bring that connectivity from the 560 kilometers that they orbit in to the 2 meters of human scale? Sorry, I'm clicking the wrong way. There have been lots of reports, lots of news articles about how that's now happening with the beta tests that are currently run by Starlink. And we were curious to explore this field further and to understand better what the opportunities really are for Asia and the Pacific. And with this, I want to hand over to John Garrity, who is the author of the report. And I want to quickly introduce him. He's an economist and policy advisor, project manager focusing on digital inclusion, universal internet access policy, and last mile connectivity. He previously worked for USAID, Cisco Systems, and the World Bank, and is currently a consultant for a number of organizations, including the ADB, ITU, the UNDP, the UN Broadband Commission, UNSCAP, and Connectivity Capital, among others. John, over to you to give us a picture of the paper that's being launched today. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Arndt, and hello, everyone. We are very pleased, as Arndt mentioned, to share with you the full report today and give you a brief introduction to the content to really help you parse out the fact from the fiction with regard to low Earth orbit satellite constellations. Now, there's a lot of excitement around LEO satellites, even some hype, so much so that this Zoolander meme from my friend Steve Song particularly encapsulates some of this elevated attention and hype directed at LEO these days. So LEO satellites, so hot this year. But hype notwithstanding, it's really important to note that high-speed data connectivity via low Earth orbit satellites is something that has been in the development for decades. And the first major wave of investment began back in the 1990s. So what we're seeing today really isn't just temporary excitement over the latest gadgets, but rather it's an evolution of technology development that has been 30+ years in the making. Back in the 1990s, just when the commercial internet was at its nascent beginning, a number of large-scale LEO constellations were attempted. For example, Teledesic, started by Bill Gates and Craig McCaw in 1990, had an initial plan to launch 840 satellites into low Earth orbit at a capital investment of $9 billion US. That's how it started. But for Teledesic, it ended when, quote, the financial, technical, and business risks were just too insurmountable, as Trent Griffin's quote points out here. And it's precisely these risks, the financial, technical, and business risks, that I think are useful to consider as a lens as we evaluate the LEO developments of today. So the report itself is organized into 5 main sections. Section 1 covers the role of satellite connectivity in the broader internet ecosystem. Section 2 introduces low Earth orbit satellite communications and draws distinctions between LEOs versus other altitude satellites. Section 3 dives a bit deeper into the LEO constellation that is most advanced in its deployment, and that is SpaceX's Starlink. Section 4 discusses some of the lingering barriers and challenges to realizing LEO service offerings. And Section 5 takes the perspective of ADB's developing member countries and presents actions that can be considered to fully leverage LEO satellite connectivity. Now, as Art showed earlier in one of his slides, fiber optic cables traverse much of the Earth via undersea fiber as well as over land. And even though upward of about 99% of all international internet traffic goes through high capacity fiber optic cables, there's still a very important role that satellites play in connecting underserved areas. So the figure that you're looking at here explains where satellite connectivity plays different roles in the telecommunications network infrastructure ecosystem. So if you look here in this chart, all countries connect to the global internet primarily through undersea or terrestrial fiber, but in some cases that international link is actually via satellite. That capacity is then distributed at a national level through high capacity links in a core backbone network, again, usually through fiber, but other technologies can play a role here, including satellite. And then that connectivity is distributed out via middle mile networks, out to last mile access networks, which then connects us to the internet via our devices. So really, it's in this middle mile and last mile where we usually see satellites in place to extend access directly to consumers and to enterprises that are located in hard to reach geographies, or as a way to connect cellular networks that are in remote areas with satellite backhaul. So what are the different types of satellites based on their altitude groupings? What do we mean when we say GEOs, MEOs, or LEOs? So GEOs are geosynchronous or geostationary orbit satellites that sit at an altitude of about 35,786 kilometers above the Earth's surface. And what that does is it allows them to remain in a fixed position over a specific location. They're orbiting in sync with the Earth's rotation, and so they can focus on a specific area, a very large area. However, this distance means that the bits of internet traffic must travel, that go between any 2 points, they must travel tens of thousands of kilometers back and forth just to be able to communicate between 2 points. And what happens is this results in a lag known as latency of roughly about 477 milliseconds or more round trip. So this latency is above noticeable thresholds for real-time two-way voice and video communications. So applications that rely on quick feedback are not particularly effective via geosatellites. Geosatellites also per unit tend to be over 100 million US dollars or more, as they are designed with a useful lifespan of 15 to 20 years. Now, medium Earth orbit satellites, or MEOs, by comparison, they sit between 2,000 kilometers and the 36,000 kilometer threshold. But in practice, they tend to be in orbits between 5,000 to 20,000 kilometers. They have a much lower latency or lag time because they sit closer to the Earth's surface, and they aren't fixed over one location. They're traveling faster than the Earth's orbit. So depending on their altitude, they can orbit the planet every few hours and multiple times a day. Now, LEOs, or low Earth orbit satellites, they sit closest to the Earth at altitudes of 160 kilometers to 2,000 kilometers. And at this altitude, the round trip latency or lag time is very low, at less than 27 milliseconds, which results in a quality of service that's similar to that of fiber broadband. Now, as these LEOs sit closer to the Earth's surface, they orbit the planet every 1.5 to 2 hours or so, meaning that they're only visible from any given fixed spot for a few minutes. And so hundreds or thousands of satellites are needed in any single constellation to be able to provide global universal coverage. And LEO satellites are much cheaper than GEOs, but they also have much shorter effective lifetimes. So where are these satellites and how many of them are in orbit? So as of December 31st of last year of 2020, there are roughly 3,400 total active satellites in orbit, and 1,800 of them are communication satellites. What you're seeing on this map, these are the positions and paths of 2,475 of them. And what you see here are predominantly communication satellites, including recent Starlink and OneWeb launches. But also roughly about 500 of these satellites on this map are Earth observation, navigation, and science-based satellites. Now, you may be wondering about some of the lines or the trails of densely packed satellites, and that's going to become more apparent in this next view, where this is the same map, but what we're seeing here are groups of satellites segmented by their altitude level. So the red dots are geosatellites that are primarily situated along the equator. The blue dots are satellites in LEO, and the trails of densely packed satellites are actually recent SpaceX Starlink deployments. These are satellites that have been launched, and they've been released by SpaceX Stage 2 boosters, and now they're just coasting towards their final orbital positions and altitudes. Also, if you look at the right-hand side of this figure, in a vertical line close to Latin America, there's a trail of 36 OneWeb satellites that were just launched on Monday. And if you can find the purple satellites, those are satellites in medium Earth orbit and include some communication satellites, but also navigational satellites such as GPS satellites. So now that you see the LEOs in orbit on the map, you may be wondering, okay, why the renewed emphasis on LEOs? If they didn't work out the first time back in the 1990s and the early 2000s, what's changed and why are people trying to build them again? Essentially, market dynamics around supply and demand have fundamentally changed since the 1990s and the early 2000s versus today. In terms of demand for internet connectivity between 2000 and 2020, what we see is that total global internet data traffic has grown over 2,100 times since 2000. Back in 2000, globally, about 75 petabytes per month of data traffic were traversing the internet in the year 2000 to over 160 exabytes per month today. And by definition, 1 exabyte is 1 billion gigabytes. So these are massive numbers. Also, the internet user base has grown tenfold from 400 million users to over 4 billion today. And of course, as we all know, digital applications and services are now embedded in every facet of our economies, our communities, and our individual lives. On the supply side, the cost to launch any mass into low Earth orbit has dramatically fallen from over 26,000 US dollars per kilogram back in 1995 to less than $1,000 per kilogram today. And we'll talk a little bit about how innovations in rocket launch capacity and the reuse of rockets are really impacting LEO constellation deployment. And lastly, of course, computing costs have fallen significantly as we all observe, even in our own consumer devices. So in the paper, we take a closer look at 4 emerging LEO constellations, SpaceX's Starlink, OneWeb, Telesat's Lightspeed, and Amazon's Project Kuiper. Now, it's important to note that there are a number of other constellations in development. For example, a 13,000 satellite constellation in China called GW or Guowang, a project announced by Russia to launch 288 LEOs and a number of others. But these other constellations are at more nascent stages and we didn't have enough detail to be able to make solid comparisons. So as indicated, of the 4 LEO constellations shown here, they're at various stages of development. To date, Starlink has already launched 1,445 satellites into orbit, and OneWeb has launched 182 satellites, including the 36 that were launched on Monday morning. Telesat's Lightspeed and Amazon's Project Kuiper are at more nascent stages preparing for launches. Now, they all have different initial constellation size thresholds before initiating commercial service, and this is in part influenced by the size and the power of the satellites, their orbital altitudes, and then their coverage areas, as well as their orbital paths. OneWeb, for example, has satellites that are arranged in a polar orbit, as you can see with that vertical line, whereas Starlink is utilizing a wide variety of more inclined orbits. There are differences in terms of the estimated total bandwidth throughput at the start of commercial operations, but also note that these are publicly available estimates that are highly dependent on a number of different assumptions, including ground station infrastructure. By comparison, each high throughput geostationary satellite today usually transmits anywhere between 100 gigabits to 200 or so gigabits per second. And you can see already that these LEO constellations are expected to dramatically increase total global capacity significantly, with each constellation alone already forecasted to increase total satellite capacity into the terabits per second. And we'll talk a little bit about that more in the next slide. Also of note, each of these constellations have already mentioned future plans to expand their constellation size to the thousands, if not tens of thousands of satellites. And these plans to get to commercial service require billions, if not tens of billions of US dollars. And we'll dive into that a little bit more. And also note that this is table 3 in the report, so you can always reference back to it in the document itself. Now, returning to the capacity point from table 3, I mean, one of the things that's very interesting about LEO is what the constellations will do in terms of the dynamics around broadband capacity and subsequent pricing. So today, satellite broadband, when compared to fixed wired and wireless services, it's very expensive due in part to the limited supply of a very scarce resource, right? The scarce resource being bandwidth. Various forecasts suggest that in the next few years, LEO will be the driving force behind a major 10x or more increase in satellite broadband capacity, which you can see in this chart. And the table on the right highlights where some of this additional capacity will be coming from, primarily LEOs, but also note that there's capacity coming from MEO and new GEO satellites as well. Similarly, other forecasts point to the same trend, such as this forecast from an investment bank showing that, or suggesting that satellite capacity will increase from 2 terabits per second at the end of 2020 to 20 terabits per second by the end of 2021, and then up to 60 terabits per second by the end of the decade. So, it's also important to note that the capacity from LEOs will be distributed through their full constellation, not focused on a specific area like GEO satellites. However, this bandwidth expansion really is expected to impact prices downward and make satellite connectivity more competitive and affordable in areas that are currently not benefiting from high-speed fiber connectivity. So increased capacity or expanded coverage alone may not necessarily impact affordability and adoption, but really it's the combination of the two, increased capacity and expanded coverage, that we expect could potentially really disrupt the satellite broadband market because of the entry of LEO. So what you're seeing here in this chart is Starlink's current coverage map. And again, the trails of tightly packed satellites are those that are from recent launches that are still moving into position. But Starlink is clearly at the most advanced stage of deployment with over 1,000 more satellites launched than its nearest competitor, OneWeb. And Starlink is already offering a public beta trial service to consumers in Canada, in the United States, the UK, Germany, and New Zealand. And in the beta trial offer, customers pay US $499 for the starter kit, which includes the satellite terminal and the Wi-Fi router, and $99 per month for speeds between 50 megabits per second to 150 megabits per second, with occasional service outages as they continue to densify their network. A few other advantages to note: in-house rocket launch capacity. Starlink's parent company, SpaceX, is already disrupting the launch market for satellites, and they've reused the Stage 1 Falcon 9 rocket 60 times, as they're really demonstrating how to lower costs of launch by reusing rockets. In-house satellite production, this is also an advantage for Starlink, whereas other satellite companies usually have to rely on vendors such as Airbus or Boeing to produce the satellites, and then even other companies to launch them, including SpaceX. We've discussed a little bit about the first mover, and then of course access to capital and financing. So Starlink's parent company, SpaceX, is already generating significant revenue from its launch business. Starlink itself has won US government contracts to supply rural broadband. And then of course, SpaceX's founder, Elon Musk, has demonstrated an ability to access capital. And then on the challenges side, so as mentioned, Starlink's constellation design is particularly dependent on a large number of ground stations. And that's potentially could change once these optical intersatellite links, or lasers, are fully implemented in the constellation, because then that capacity that gets beamed up to the constellation can be shared around more, as opposed to then just, currently just beaming back down into the coverage area. And this point about device subsidy sustainability, it's an issue to watch, because currently in Starlink's public beta, the starter kit is $499, but recent comments by SpaceX's president suggest that the cost of production is really a little bit under 1,500 US dollars per unit. So when this cost matches pricing is going to be something to watch. A couple of other risks and challenges for LEO, and just to, this is more broadly, significant capital expenditure requirements. This is not just for Starlink, of course, but we've already seen one other LEO, OneWeb, go into restructuring. So there's fierce competition coupled with large CapEx needs. So we would expect potentially some consolidation at some point. Terminal affordability is an issue, not just for Starlink, but even, for example, OneWeb has indicated that their consumer devices will be well over 1,000 US dollars to start. Regulatory barriers for market entry are not uniform across countries, so a global service provider such as these LEOs would require much effort at a national level to be able to begin to provide service. Radio frequency interference issues and coordination, this is required, and here the ITU is a major player, so we may hear from our colleague Atsuko Okuda to tell us a little bit about that. Satellite and space debris monitoring and coordination. This is becoming increasingly important as these constellations number in the hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of satellites. Already, we saw a couple of weeks ago a potential issue between a potential collision between a Starlink and a OneWeb satellite. It's not clear exactly how close that was. There's differences in reporting, but it just highlights that there's need for more coordination and monitoring of the satellites in orbit. And then lastly, concerns of interference to astronomy, particularly by ground-based long exposure telescopes. And this is something that's being discussed and workarounds are being made. Okay, so the last section of the report, we talk about some of the policy and regulatory considerations to prepare for LEO satellite connectivity service, particularly by developing member countries of the ADB. These include a number of points that we go into detail in the report, but just to highlight quickly here, I mean, these include issues such as ensuring flexible and streamlined licensing procedures, not only for satellite providers themselves, but domestic internet service providers so they can access satellite connectivity, allow for the satellite provision of international internet capacity without requiring a domestic hub in country or domestic ground station, the removal or the reduction of import tariffs, quotas, and local manufacturing requirements for satellite user terminals to lower the cost on the terminal side, engage in regional discussion and cooperation and regulatory convergence to improve the ease of doing business ecosystem for LEO satellite connectivity. Consider deploying universal access funding to support public access for community Wi-Fi deployments that are backhauling through satellite. Investing in accurate infrastructure availability maps so we actually know where there are coverage issues and we can target those areas much better. Consider supporting consumer financing for user terminals, supporting demand generation activities, and setting timely expectations for spectrum coordination, both between satellite operators and also between satellite and terrestrial systems. So in conclusion, there was a lot there. We wanted to make sure we shared some of the report with you. There's much more, of course, in the document itself. But in conclusion, as we zoom back out and consider the big picture, so how it started, how LEO started, right? This is a connectivity innovation that, yes, is 30 plus years in the making, beginning with the large-scale LEO constellations conceived back in the 1990s. How it's going today? Well, as you can see, I mean, it does look very promising. And with the expansion of coverage, coupled with the tens of terabits per second of new capacity that we're expecting, we do think we could see positive impacts to affordability and internet adoption across Asia and the Pacific. So stay tuned, watch closely, and prepare for the new capacity. So with that, please do check out the report at the URL shown here and reach out to us if you would like to discuss in further depth. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Arndt.
Thank you very much, John. Very swift breeze through the report. Thanks for this. And there are already questions in the Q&A for you. Please keep them coming. I'm going to introduce the next speaker, which is Thomas Abel. And Thomas, if you would like to share your slides already. Thomas is leading ADB's Digital Technology for Development Unit, which is tasked with facilitating the effective use of digital technology in ADB programs to improve development impact. He has over 20 years of professional experience in digital technology, including software development, systems architecture, and technology strategy. And prior to ADB, he worked for Accenture Development Partnerships, leading ADB's program in digital technology for development and financial inclusion. He served various management and technical roles in information technology and strategy for large multinationals, including Hewlett-Packard, Motorola, and the Ford Motor Company. Thomas, over to you to give the perspective from ADB on this topic.
Thanks, Arndt, and thanks, John. Thanks for the great work on the report, and thanks everybody for joining today. I'm just going to provide a little background initially on ADB and what we are doing in this space. So for folks who don't know about ADB, we were founded in 1966. We have 68 members and about 3,200 staff from 60 countries, and we actually provide around $32 billion a year in annual funding. And you know, as the last year has been really focused on the pandemic, we have provided $20 billion in COVID response, plus a $9 billion program for vaccines. And, you know, the pandemic has, as Arndt mentioned, really highlighted the importance of internet access and bridging the digital divide in our region. We have a wide range of developing member countries, as you can see on this map, all the way from Armenia, Georgia, you know, in the west to all of the Pacific Islands in the east. And, you know, there's quite a lot of challenges in many of our developing member countries for getting internet access. And what ADB can do in terms of connectivity, there's some history here. We have invested in infrastructure directly, submarine cables, communication satellites, broadband networks, last mile infrastructure. We also provide grants and technical assistance. We also support policy actions. We have worked with many governments on the national broadband plans, competition policy, rural access funds, those kinds of things. We also can support demand generation through our programs, because we do a lot of work in areas like energy, education, health, that, you know, where digital connectivity is an important element, and we can build those into those programs. We have some example projects. The map there you see is many of the submarine cables for the Pacific that we've invested in. We, a couple of years ago, invested in Pacific that has a geosynchronous satellite serving many remote areas in the Pacific. And we've worked recently with the Philippines government on shared connectivity for the government sector. And then moving on, I think, you know, why we're interested in this, we think that, you know, ADB, we're looking for ways that we can you know, support the, you know, the bridging of the digital divide, and the LEO brings a new opportunity to the table. And, you know, that's why we, you know, developed the report, and we wanted to really look at where, you know, where our engagement can, you know, can make a difference. So this basically outlines that. So one is gap analysis, looking at really where the, you know, the capacity limitations are, and how the LEO constellations can map into the existing telco ecosystem. Because this is a good point, that the satellite connectivity is very complementary with fiber, because, you know, really remote areas are difficult to cover with fiber, because you have to build out the fiber, and if there's limited populations, it's hard to justify that fixed expense. Whereas if you have, you know, the LEO satellites can serve remote areas without building the physical infrastructure out to there. And so, you know, so that basically complementarity is something that has to be mapped out and managed. The second one is looking at the enabling environment. This is something that, you know, John mentioned, that regulatory and policy advocacy, satellite infrastructure like ground stations, and public-private partnerships. We have a whole team dedicated to that, and we have a lot of experience working with governments in our region in this area. And then the third area is use cases and implementation. We can look at, you know, what the new satellite services can do in our development programming. We have many development programs in remote areas where connectivity is problematic. And by looking at this new opportunity, we could actually potentially look for places to develop pilots and showcase where the technology might work and what the business models might look like. And then the fourth area is actually direct financing. We could potentially do either sovereign or private financing into some of the infrastructure, or into telecom operations that would potentially leverage this type of infrastructure. And we have experience doing both of those. So so basically, we think that there are many opportunities for ADB and other MDBs to get involved and leverage this new technology, And that's why we wanted to get kind of a jump on where it's going and what the trends are. So that's my summary, and I'll hand it back to you, Arndt. Thanks, and take it from there.
Thanks a lot, Thomas, and thanks for the perspective from ADB. I'd like to now invite our external panelists and give the floor first to Atsuko Okuda, who is the Regional Director of the ITU Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. And Ms. Okuda was appointed to this position in April 2020, and in her previous role at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, known to most people as ESCAP, she served as the chief of the ICT and Development section of the ICT and Disaster Risk Reduction Division. At ESCAP, she promoted the development of regional broadband connectivity and inclusive broadband through the implementation of the Asia Pacific Information Superhighway Initiative. She served at the UN Regional Commissions for Western Asia and Africa, as well as the UN Secretariat and the UNDP. Thanks so much for joining us today, Atsuko.
We introduced this project initiatives in 9 Pacific countries, as you see on the screen, and 93 units of satellite equipment, CU-band, KU-band, and Ka-band were introduced to be used across different sectors such as health and education. And we received overwhelmingly positive responses from the countries in our impact assessment. And how was it used? It was used to connect communities for community communication, social media, and the general communication at large, but in more specifically, it was used to connect the health centers for telemedicine and to manage the hospital and healthcare, as well as distance learning, and especially useful and relevant to remote islands. And teachers and students also shared their appreciations and very positive responses in our assessments. And last year, if you recall, there was a Cyclone Harold, which hit the Pacific Island countries around this time in 2020, and the satellite capabilities that we established was the only communication channels in the remote communities. So we found that this was a very important communication channels for those islands, and perhaps we can underline the importance of satellite communication in the case of natural disasters and emergencies. And in the assessment that we conducted, we found that satellite broadband was and is critical for universal digital inclusion, especially in the context of the Pacific, and to connect the remote islands. And the demand was particularly high, while the high-capacity submarine cables continue to enhance the connectivity to the main islands. But perhaps satellite remains as an important channel to connect the other many remote islands. And Ka-band was found most promising because of the performance, cost, and ease of deployment. And additionally, we believe that the future, digital future and need for digital services and digital government will increase its importance, and we hope that the next level of support will create the opportunities for more digital services, and that will sustain the demand for satellites and submarine cable services. And I would like to underline the context of COVID-19. It was very important when the video conferencing and e-learning and online activities became a norm, and we have to accelerate the extending the connectivity to remote and rural communities, including the islands. So how do we deal with this? What is the next step to support the communities and to create the demands? ITU promotes an integrated development approach called Smart Islands. Smart Island is to try to use those broadband capabilities within the communities, so that either through Wi-Fi or other means, we would like to make sure that these essential services such as health, agriculture, early warning, and e-learning are delivered to the community members. And these contents will be provided by the government in the main island capital, UN, NGOs, and other partners. And that requires the more systematic and whole of government approach in the capital and within the government as well. So what we promote is to perhaps look at the SDG in a high level manner, and that will be translated into the national vision and SDG implementation plan using the whole of government digital platforms and digital strategy and digital applications on the integrated and interoperable platforms, and that will be delivered in smart islands, smart cities, and smart village. In addition, I would just like to add a sectoral approach and how it looks like in the sector of education, for example. ITU works with UNICEF to extend the connectivity to unconnected schools, and we have this GIGA initiative that maps the unconnected schools, develop the affordable and sustainable financing models, and to provide fit-for-purpose infrastructure to connect schools, as well as empower the learning and other skills development in the community and schools. And additionally, ITU and other partners are promoting Connect to Recover to make sure that the connectivities are fit for purpose, helps the preparedness for emergencies and crises, and help us recover from the pandemic. And finally, of course, in the process, we require a lot of toolkits and resources to develop each link and each services. And we have a number of tools, as you see, but these are just samples. We have more, such as the last mile connectivity toolkits and digital service planning toolkits. I mentioned already GIGA. We also support with FAO in the development of e-agriculture. So we believe that this partnership, cross-sectoral collaboration, whole of government approach, and future-proof integrated approach would be essential to materialize and to realize the benefits of satellite communication, as well as the submarine cables to the community and to the end users. So thank you very much. That was the last slide from my side, and back to you, Ant.
Thanks a lot, Atsuko, and we're really happy to partner with ITU on this topic. As everyone can see, there is a lot of work that has gone into this top topic already from ITU, and we value this partnership greatly. So thanks, Atsuko, for your views. I would like to now invite Professor Jun Murai to give his views on the topic. Professor is at Keio University in Japan, and he established UNET, which was the first network in Japan that was connecting multiple universities back in 1984. In 1988, he founded the Widely Integrated Distributed Environment Project, WIDE project, a Japanese internet research consortium. Professor Murai holds a PhD in computer science and has long been engaged in the research related to internet technology platforms, and is known as the father of the internet in Japan and in international circles as the Internet Samurai. He is special advisor to the Cabinet of Japan and serves on many other governmental committees, is an active in numerous international scientific associations. In 2013, he was recognized by the Internet Hall of Fame as a pioneer and has been awarded multiple other honors. So we're very happy to have you here to give us your view on what LEO Constellations might do to internet connectivity in the region. Thanks so much, and over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you hear me all right?
Yes, we do.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'm going to share my slide, and then I'm going to talk about the great report generated by ADB. I really appreciate that. about Leo. And then, also, I've been working for the more than 25 years on the satellite and the internet project. Therefore, from that view, the expectation about the Leo in the region, it's going to be my subject. Let me see, the internet impact on the satellite. So the report already talking about the impact of the internet population for the Asia Pacific region. There would be a little bit of a number difference, but it's the red dot is 6% of the population of all of the world for the participating in the internet in 2000. And then this is the last year, and it's 60% of the 63%. I think it's almost 70 now, but 70% of the population is participating on the internet. But as everybody said, then Asia is still a lot of room for the outreaching for the internet inclusion space. But the satellite benefit is not limited to the internet inclusion, which is kind of solving the digital divide. But this is a country like Japan, for example, where almost 100% of the people residents accessing the internet, but we only have a 60% of a geographic coverage, which is very low. And then why it should be broader. And then so it's going to be agriculture and forestry and the fishery and the other industries are not accessing the internet, and the IoT and the drone and whatever are not properly accessing the internet, which is kind of a room for the various industries and the economy to demand for the LEO as well. So in addition to LEO and the MEO, GEO description on the report, but the Alphabet, company like Alphabet and others are working on a stratosphere connectivity as well, so that it's getting very closer, so that they can usually accessing your smartphone device directly. So anyway, so the important thing is we call it a non-terrestrial network, which is covering the land from the air, so that the unreachable area can be covered by the internet. That's a very important thing. And the satellite internet project in Asia Pacific in the past, and we've been working on for more than 20, almost 30 years. We are working with also partners in Southeast Asia. So 25 plus years. So long time. Therefore, many of the Southeast Asia countries, our network from using the satellite were practically the first broadband internet from the air, utilizing the GEO satellite. So that was the IEEE project on the bottom. And then on top of IEEE, then we had a school on internet project, which is basically the sharing the university classes over the universities, partner universities. So IEEE started from 96 and covering many nations, as you see, and we did the new protocol standardized as a unidirectional link routing, and IP version 6 multicast deployed, and so that the engineers on each of the universities trained in the operation of the kind of overlaying internet by the satellite with their domestic network, which is a little bit complex, complicated operation, but that's a very good training for the operators in the region. And this SOI Asia, School on the Internet Asia, is a consortium of 26 partners in 11 countries in 2001, and then increasing the number, and then working on various things like EBA, evidence-based approach, which is sponsored by a Japanese government, and then collecting the students from the Asia, and then doing the internship field work of each of the partner countries, which is very much accepted, and the certificates on EBA issued already more than 1,000 students in the region. The infrastructure-wise, EPINIC and the WIDE project started the program called Arena PAC, Arterial Research and Educational Network in Asia Pacific, which is a submarine cable project, and on the region, the newly funded by APIDT, Asian Pacific Internet Development Trust. And this is a submarine cable starting from the 100 gig and up. So 100 gig submarine cable to connect the red part already up, and then the other colors are planned, and then they working together with the other research and educational network thing. And the new one starting from this year is funded by EPINIC Foundation. It's the project EPINIC is EPINIC Foundation is basically the funding organization located both in Hong Kong and Australia, and we proposed the concept of how the future satellite network can be, overriding on an existing terrestrial network, so non-terrestrial and the terrestrial combination, how that the internet is going to be operated for what purposes. It's an internet inclusion and the alternative internet in the region. That's the first one. And the second one, we had a lot of experiences on kind of emergency ready, which is the disaster recovery and other things. And so complicated technology is going to be necessary, so that to manage those two layers of internet and the switching between them, or adding the capacity from the air and the terrestrial. So that's a little bit of a complicated technology. So the EPINIC Foundation is going to be funded for the 5 years for the EBA activity of the things, which is going to be environment, health, and the disaster among the universities in the region, as well as the future internet engineering technologies. So that's my speech, and EPINIC, thank you for EPINIC Foundation funding the Soyuz and Enterprise for 5 years, and the satellite over internet architecture research is going to be a very interesting one, and especially on the active LEO operations these years, and the university collaborates of the other EBA is going to be starting by funding of the EPINIC Foundation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Murai. And what you describe is really a very rich network of professionals in the region, people that are, getting an education on how to do the engineering on the ground level. And that is so very useful when we think about rolling out new technologies in countries that suffer from connectivity issues. I would like to invite the panelists to switch on their cameras again. I know that John has been extremely busy answering questions. There are now a total of 24 questions already answered in the Q&A. So while we have almost run out of time, a lot of people are getting their questions answered, and we would invite you to reach out to us in case you would like to discuss further. I mentioned the email earlier, but here it is again, dtcommunity@adb.org. One question that was raised by a colleague from our Central West Asia region, Yasmin Siddiqui, was to again talk a little bit more about costs and reducing costs in the long run, medium term, maybe even the near term. And there were several others that were wondering how affordability can be achieved with LEOs. And I wanted to invite anyone on the panel to talk about dropping costs, because it was earlier mentioned that currently there's only one beta rollout happening, and that is not yet with the final costing for a commercial offering. It is a beta rollout. So any views on how that might play out in the coming years?
Yeah, Jim, right. And then, as I mentioned in my presentation, then it's really important that the commercial industry is going to be getting a benefit of the LEO, so that the services can be, kind of, the price going to be a drop. And then, therefore, I think it's really important that they explore the advanced usage by the economy and the commercial industries, as I mentioned, that the drone connectivity and then the new industries coming in for the digital transformation, like agriculture and the fishery and the forestry in Japan. And so they should be in responsible for the, kind of creating the new economy for the LEO industries.
Thanks, Arne. I would just also add that the cost of these networks is really hard to estimate right now, because we don't know the long-term number of subscribers and the total bandwidth and how the cost of the ground stations and all of this. But we do know, as John mentioned, the amount of new capacity will be quite large, and there will be demand for that. And I think that, especially if there's competition, it should drive, towards a much more effective and as the professor said, new business models be enabled too. And if these things can really cover the cost of these, deployments and, these satellites that may last only 5 years, then, we've seen with just a few million subscribers at the rates that they're talking about, which they should be able to get in developed countries who are paying competitive rates under the pilot or in the beta, that basically cost for the revenues that they get for these sort of high income customers could then sort of support a lower cost for developing countries. And these satellites have an unusual feature where when they're flying over a remote area, they can't serve anybody else. So there's kind of unused capacity there. And I think that, there could be opportunities also for using it for cellular backhaul services, where that could create low cost cellular, and as John mentioned, community Wi-Fi. So there's many, many ways that this could come down in price.
Atsuko-san?
Thank you. I would like to echo the views from Professor Murai and Thomas. And I believe that the widening the user base and deepening the usage would be critical. But I would also like to add that perhaps the simplified policy and regulations and the processes could reduce the overhead type of cost, as well as perhaps we should take into account the social benefits that may or may not be translated into the economic terms. So perhaps in overall, in totality, the investments of satellite connectivity will make sense. And I believe that if we look at the Pacific countries and the number of islands and remote communities, perhaps we can aggregate the numbers and see in totality what it means and how we can bring down the cost. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much, all of you. And we are on top of our planned hour-long webinar. So we will have to wrap up, but there are tons of interesting questions in the Q&A. And what I would suggest is to now end the recording after I close, and some of us can stay online and chat a bit further. I know, John, and you can switch on your video to say farewell to everyone. You've been extremely busy answering questions, and there's a lot more to think about. From our perspective, we have planned a few more sessions internally, but also to look at country context and to really understand what are the issues where we can make a difference as the ADB, together with partners like ITU or the WIDE project. What are the things that where we can make a difference to actually help LEOs deliver on the promises that they are now seem to be holding, which is about creating more affordable, more accessible, more high-speed internet in remote and difficult to reach regions of Asia and the Pacific. So with this, let me thank all of our panelists and my co-author John Garrity and everyone else in the team for doing a fabulous job today. And the paper is launched and available online. With this, thanks a lot and have a good day. Bye-bye.